is it time for fun stuff?
There is one little thing, which is that the Scottish also had an election.
Oh, geez,
And the
yeah.
SNP came back with not enough for an overall majority, but they did slightly better than I thought they did. And along with the Greens, they do have enough to call for a referendum. Whether or not they can get it is a matter of constitutional dispute. The First Minister has said that she's not going to call for it until we're out of COVID anyway. But expect this one to run and run. This is a real story. This is going to happen sooner rather than later. So keep watching this one. I don't anticipate anything over the next 2 years, really, till we're fully out of this. But then, yeah, we'll see where this one goes.
Do you have, is your view, and I know you've spoken about this in various talks and written about it as well. What's your personal slash professional view, or are those two separate views that you have?
No, they're not. I mean, I would put it this way. I'm a sort of a de facto, not supporter is the wrong word. I understand why people think it might be a good idea to be independent after all this time. And one way to think about it is the following. It's two cities that are closely integrated together over a distance of 20 miles. It's a technologically advanced society. It's got really good universities. It's got a lot of cultural and historical capital. Add a dozen towns on top of that and a handful of other places. Fantastic, beautiful countryside. Mm-hmm. I mean, how hard can it be, right? And then the other one is this. The last time that Scotland was independent, the word capitalism was yet to be written down.
No. So that's...
Yeah. 300 odd years, right?
I was wondering.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. So if you think Brexit taking 30 years of stuff apart is a hard one, try 300.
Yeah.
So what happens is when you get down to talking about this, and I actually just spent an hour on a call with a think tank in London talking about this and brainstorming the things. What we ended up doing was the following, right? So imagine that this happens, then what happens to the currency market? Or imagine what this happens, what happens to imports, right? And literally, they could tell me a story and I would tell them a convincing story of the exact opposite. I would tell them a story, they could do that to me. Nobody knows. We've never been here before. So my rationale for it, to the extent that I have one, is if people in Scotland want to be independent, a democracy says you should be, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look at the numbers, overwhelmingly with younger people, and I think that's going to stay because they're just not basically able to form assets in the way that prior generations have, mm-hmm. therefore, like everyone else, therefore they have less to lose. Secondly, it is true that the only bit of the UK that grows is London and everybody else lives on transfers. Shouldn't you do better than that? Yes. And then the third one is the democratic one. The last time that Scotland voted the same way as England, particularly for the Conservative Party, in full throat was 1951. Maybe 1956, but it's been a long time.
Yeah.
So for all of those reasons, I kind of think it's an inevitability, and if it's an inevitability, then it's everybody's responsibility to make the transition as good as possible. So does that make me a supporter or a realist? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it sounds very realist to me. But here's my follow-up question, and this is on the personal level, and totally asking from America as an American. Is there an identifiable Scottish identity that is separate from the British identity?
Oh, there certainly is. But the way to think about it is how much of that is generated by the fact that it's not the English identity.
Huh.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll give you an example of this. During the 1980s and not so much the 1990s, but during the 1980s, English soccer fans were notoriously violent. And they got banned everywhere, and there were like murders and all this sort of stuff. And the Scots, who were just as bam-pot-headed, as you want to put it that way, at that time, basically said, right, we're going to become the friendly fans. And we went to tournaments when we still got to tournaments, and basically got drunk and kissed people and fell in fountains and became everybody's favourite fans, right? And we did that because they were awful, right? Had they been awesome, I suspect we would have been awful, right? When the football's on, there's a T-shirt that gets sold in England, although I think you can't do this now because it's a bit too sort of racist, which used to be the following. It just say ABE, which meant anybody but England.
Okay.
Right. So I don't care. I don't care. Nigeria, right. New Zealand, whatever, right? Anybody but England, right? So it's an identity is very much built in opposition. And let's not say that's all the content. There's definitely something there. But to the extent that it's a separate identity, if you look at opinion polling, all the rest of it, there's this notion that like Scotland's this much more left-wing country. It's utter tosh. Just go look at the numbers, right? It's just simply not true. It's very similar to the rest of the United Kingdom in its attitudes, its dispositions. We have a funny accent. I mean, can you really really build a nationalism on an accent? I guess you can try, right? So to
Yeah.
me, the case has to be essentially that you think over the course of a generation, your children would be better off in a place where they're in control of the economic and political decisions, right?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
grown-up way of thinking about it, right?
Yep.
But it is a generational project. It's not for the next 5 years. And
Yeah.
people want to know what's going to happen the Tuesday after independence. And the honest answer is nobody knows.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're so right. I mean, the experiment, I mean, this is my super deep thought for the day. I mean, can't be known for so many years down the road. I mean, whether success or failure. And even then, I mean, whether one could deem it a success or a failure too.
Yeah, there's David McWilliams, who's a commentator and economist in Ireland, has a great podcast called the David McWilliams Podcast, and I was on there talking about this, and he had this brilliant one. He says, if you think about Ireland's experience, right, 1923 we get independence, 1923 and 1970 years was 50 years of ugh. Our major export was labour going to London to work on building sites, right? Ireland was a poor, badly educated country, and it took them basically 50 years to turn that around and turn it into what it is now, a successful
Yeah.
high-tech economy, right?
Yeah.
And he called those years the Taliban years, right? I mean, it was a Catholic Taliban, but it was the Taliban. And, in a sense, does Scotland have to go through that? No, because it's not 1923. The capital stock's higher, the human capital stock's higher, right, etc. But you know what? It's not going to be like night and day.
Right.
And
right.
anyone who's telling you that basically must be lying, because nobody knows what's going to happen.
Well, they need to start having babies, is what the Scots need to do to then.
They're also much more, interestingly, the government is way more pro-immigration.
Oh,
Right?
really?
Right. Now, here's the thing. When it doesn't actually have any costs, right, when it's cheap talk, right,
Yeah.
you can say that and people can go, oh, yeah, it's absolutely right. When you're independent, you're going to be able to actually sign that check.
Yeah. Over the summer, total side note, the prime minister, who's a woman, right, decided to pay for feminine hygiene products. So the first
Yes.
government to do that. I mean, that kind of stuff is kind of cool.
I
Those sorts
yes.
of policies. Yeah.